This is another real-world challenge that those of us working within the process have to come to grips with on a day-to-day basis. We have some hard choices ahead of us. The ecological footprint of feeding people through fisheries is actually much smaller than the ecological footprint of feeding people through livestock, through poultry, and even through agriculture. Life cycle analysis have shown that repeatedly. And not smaller by a little bit, smaller by 80 or 90% usually. We can reduce it further, however. But all of them come at the cost of reducing the contribution of fisheries to global food security. What's the ethical choice? Protecting biodiversity or feeding an increasingly hungry and fish-dependent human community? These are both ethical outcomes that cannot simultaneously be met with any of the current strategies available. Can we reduce this conflict? Can we find opportunities for synergies? Spatial planning is an obvious strategy that may help. But the idea that there's some technological fix out there waiting to be discovered, some perfect MPA that is going to produce 75 million metric tons of fish, not 75,000 tons of fish, isn't out there waiting to be aligned. People who try to sell win-win situations sell them on small-scale solutions to local problems. We need large-scale solutions to global problems. And the win-win situations are going to have to be, may not be out there waiting to be discovered. We think there are hard choices that society needs to make. Choices that involve social equity issues that are complex, ethical issues that are complex, as well as science issues that are very complex. What's the problem we face? We can improve fisheries management, reduce economic and environmental costs. We've made progress in the last 15 years. We can make more progress. But the fisheries-related measures to deal with the biodiversity considerations, everything on the list of topics being discussed, cost in terms of contribution of fisheries to global food security. What part of society is going to make the choice about where those outcomes occur? What choices actually get made in this balance? Who's going to bear the cost? Typically, on this planet, it's the poor and underrepresented who end up paying the costs of it. How are the benefits going to be distributed? Where is that discussion going on? Who's going to be the group that assesses the balances, the risks, the consequences, the choices, and actually makes those choices? There needs to be a serious discussion that puts the ideologies aside and deals with some hard realities that we don't have much more time to put off confronting. And we need coherent responses that are bought into from the full spectrum of viewpoints. We do not see this yet, and the result is we're in a situation where each of the things being debated in the food security forum, how to deal with the global food security problems, and there are lots of places where these discussions are going on, are looking to increase all harvests to the MSY level, despite the fact that probably everyone in this room knows the risks and shortcomings of doing so. meeting global food security, those discussions always end up fishing more on lower trophic levels. Focusing fishing on the highest productivity areas in the sea. That's the best way to meet food security needs. Diversify both land, freshwater and maritime aquaculture. Increase its intensity. Develop strains that are high yield, fast growth, vegetarian fish that can grow and produce a kilogram in a year. In a biodiversity community, when you have a discussion of fisheries, you end up always in the same place. Reduce the harvest rate. Reduce fishing on lower trophic levels even more because of the ecosystem risks associated with it. Give extra protection to the areas that are highest productivity. Reduce mariculture because it tends to recycle fish meal and it's inefficient use of fish harvested from the sea. And if you're doing freshwater aquaculture, use only local strains of native species. These pose some real dilemmas when you line them up that way. And we're trying to have discussions leading to choices that are not simple in a governance framework that's really fragmented. There are lots of places where there are discussions go on about the relationship of fishery sustainability to livelihoods and food security. There are lots of discussions that go on about fisheries and climate change. Lots of discussions that go on about climate change and biodiversity. Lots of discussions that go on, come on, follow the yellow arrow, food security and biodiversity. Many of those are going on here at this meeting. Many fewer discussions across the corners of this dialogue between fishery sustainability and biological conservation, but those are increasing in all the fora like CBD and FAO and IUCN. Climate change and food security, much more attention to that in the last decade as well. But what there is not is the four-way discussion. How are we going to deliver food security in a changing climate, keep fisheries sustainable, and conserve biodiversity? There is no win-win situation out there waiting to be found, and there is no discussion going on with all four of those parts of the equation on the table at the same time. Because there's no fully integrated discussion, constantly, solutions that come up in one discussion, in one forum, are perceived as problems in some other forum that need to be solved. They're not solutions in themselves. So we do not yet have any agreement on what the right balance for society is in the four corners of that diagram. The policy dialogue about climate change and food security, climate change and biodiversity conservation, they're all going on in parallel without feedback loops being structured in among them. The outcomes of the dialogues are not coherent. Governments are not getting consistent guidance on what to do to deal with these problems. Even with the conservation approach, there's an increasing tension between the fortress mentality, create areas, protect the hell out of them, and let the rest of the world go to hell, and the sustainable use vision of the world, where everything gets used, and the world will be perturbed, but only to a sustainable level. the suspicion that's growing between people who have to find common solutions is one of the hardest problems many of us who try to bridge these communities face every day. So we have to find a forum and some institutions where all these issues are on the table at the same time. And really come to grips with some hard questions. How to meet our food security needs. How to get that 75 million tons of fish out of the sea and freshwater. Or come up with a different way to feed the planet. How to maintain productive ecosystems if we are going to have to be using them that hard by 2050. What are the strategies and objectives that we adopt today that will in 2050 have people on the planet not protein deprived and ecosystems in the ocean and our freshwater not degraded and looking a whole lot like intensive agriculture? Without a merger of these different policy discussions going on in different places, the likelihood outcome is going to be governance on every one of these pathways is going to fail, and we can't afford that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I would like to, we have a second presentation briefer, I think, from on this Sato-um, but I would like to offer you a few minutes if you want any clarification on what you just heard or any verification of any fact, and then we will open the discussion on both presentations at the same time. But if you want any clarification at this stage, you can put a few questions if you want. I see none. Oh, sorry, you have one.
So because I have to run to an informal contact with one of PA, so I'm just going to make a couple of points. Thanks, Jake. That was an excellent presentation. It really puts the contradiction between both strategies, and certainly very relevant in the new IUCN program that aims to present nature-based solutions is a solution to development challenges. I think a couple of points that I would add, and certainly having been working, the Nature Conservancy has very similar strategies that provide nature-based solutions, but working with people that come from the food security angle, particularly development organizations and bilateral aid, which, as this is very high in their agenda, you put forward the Aichi target is one of the policy drivers for that. There's the MDG target that's still valid. The MDG target is halving hunger, people living under hunger for that. I think a couple of complexities go when you start looking at regional perspectives and country perspective, is that, you know, where do you have people living under hunger and fish dependency for that? But also, when you look at the food security agenda has, in addition to the food production, the access to food. And when you start looking at fish producing countries, these are, most of that production actually goes into exploitation. And how do you deal with food security for actually the poor and the very dependent fisheries versus, you know, global production factors? And I think that is a point that really should be taken into consideration, because you will have an even more skewed version and even more and taking it globally to some of the marine and fisheries priorities, where you have a lot of the focus and management of the high seas, versus you really need to bring it back to a much more stronger management of coastal fisheries, which, as we know, you know, totally unmanaged. And how do we start creating a movement towards that? So I'll leave you with these thoughts, and I'm really sorry because I have to run in 10 minutes.
In other words, I presented an easy, optimistic picture compared to reality.
Thank you, Eamon.
Can I ask a brief question?
Let's ask one.
Yep. Clarification, if you need one.
I'm not an expert, but just a brief question about the fish meal. I've read somewhere that some people at the FAO claim that the ratio that we used to speak about 5 kilos to 1 kilo, is not really accurate today, and there are all kinds of alternatives that are being developed. So how do you see aquaculture or mariculture as a true solution to kind of narrow the gap of these 75 million tons?
If we look at mariculture as growing salmon, halibut, high-priced fish for high-priced markets, we're not talking about dealing with global food security. We're talking about dealing with global economics. Certainly there are many parts of the world, China being a model, where coastal mariculture can work with low protein input food supplies and produce high protein content products for human consumption. But it's a different choice made than much of the planet that's consuming the fish meal for aquaculture right now has made, where they're aiming at the highest value markets, which in the process require protein to feed carnivores. It's not the only mariculture choice.
We can have a lot more discussions later on. Only a clarification if you have, because
yeah, I was curious to know whether your calculations include waste in your estimates of fish production. I'm just interested in a recent comparison between New Zealand and Iceland, which indicated that New Zealand was wasting something like order of 30 to 50% of its fish that was being caught, and therefore that would actually make up for your, nearly in the order of your 75 million tonnes straight off from waste. Thanks.
The 75 million is assuming 100% use of what's caught. And that's another optimistic assumption.
the calculations are made based on protein.
Yeah.
And those are proteins that are really intaken, not the waste. I'm not sure what the waste calculation you are referring to are, but obviously if you take fish, you have bones and things like that. And that happens even in small-scale fisheries and villages. Nobody eats 100% of the fish it catches. So I don't know how the calculations are made. One thing that was not included for sure in your number is the discards. That's for sure.
The forward projections are assuming 0 discards, which again is an optimistic scenario. And the best estimates used by FAO and the UN for discards show a decreasing trend, and it's what, 44 million tons is the most recent?
Of what?
The 2005 estimate of global discards, which is on a downward trend and continuing to decrease. So we might get, if we were willing to use absolutely everything brought on deck, probably half of what we need.
Okay, I would like to ask Mr. Makino to make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Makino, FEG member, and I'm from Japan. Now let me briefly introduce you to the more local coastal activities of the sustainable marine ecosystem service usage, which initiated in Japan. Okay, it is called Sato-umi, and Sato-umi is the Japanese word actually. Sato means village or fishing community. Umi means coastal seas. So Sato-umi literally means the coastal seas in front of the fishing community. This is a Japanese term for mosaic of different ecosystem types along with human settlements, which has been managed to produce bundles of ecosystem services for human well-being. So in this concept, human community or human being is not something to be eliminated from the ecosystem, but local community is the indispensable part of the local ecosystem. This is the graphical image of Sato-umi. You can find fishing village here, fishers are operating, and also aquaculture. Also, this is the urban area. People are coming to the coastal area and having fun, and shellfish gathering, educations, angling, nature observation, and so on. So, in the Sato-umi concept, we are looking at the bundle of ecosystem services, not the food provision, not the fisheries production only. So the purpose of the Sato-umi activities is aiming at well-balanced mix of various ecosystem services and sustainable management of coastal seas, not only qualities, but also ecosystem function and structures, as well as services. Sato-umi concept has been discussed in Japan for long years, not very long, but for last, let's say, 10 years. And in the international,